At first, there was confusion, shouting and whispering behind the thick doors of the chambers. Servants said that the Queen of France herself, known to the people as the She-Wolf, was sitting on her bed, tearing the sheets with her fingernails and hissing like a wild animal when the doctor touched her ulcerated skin. In the streets of Paris, at the foot of the palace, rumors were already circulating that her body was ravaged by decay and her mind by devilish delusions. Reports intercepted by secret scribes noted, "It is impossible to breathe in her room. The stench is so strong that the candles smoke and go out." Thus began the last weeks of a woman whose name had recently struck fear into the hearts of kings and ambassadors. The first signs of illness were small boils on her skin, which appeared in the middle of autumn. Court physicians attributed them to damp air and recommended bloodletting in small doses, twice a week, drawing no more than half a cup of blood from a vein. Leeches were placed on her hands and feet for a quarter of an hour, and her skin was smeared with ointments made from lard, crushed garlic, and laurel oil. In the morning, she was given a pinch of opium powder, and in the evening, 2 spoonfuls of thick poppy syrup to help her sleep. But the ulcers did not heal. They grew larger, became covered with scabs, and oozed a foul-smelling fluid. The doctors recorded their observations every day. Pulse rapid and irregular, tongue coated with a grey film, urine cloudy with sediment. The guards at the door were changed every 6 hours. The keys to the chambers were kept by the chamberlain of the old nobility, but the new favourites gained access through a secret passage. Servants' records mentioned that young knights came at midnight, and although the disease had already made her body unbearable to touch, rumours of secret meetings multiplied. These rumours became a weapon in the hands of her family's enemies. The old nobility accused her of debauchery, but her new entourage justified her actions. Such is her nature. This is how she strengthens her power. The political struggle intensified. Behind closed doors, meetings were held to discuss who would inherit the throne if the Queen died without acknowledging her will. Ambassadors from England and Burgundy secretly offered gold to anyone who could persuade her to sign the necessary document. Reports stated she is delirious, but still remembers who is her enemy and who is her friend. She trusts no one. Her paranoia grew. She demanded that every cup of wine be checked and forced her servants to taste her food before her. Notes in the margins of the palace journals indicated that twice the seals on wine vessels had been found to have been tampered with. Her physical suffering became increasingly apparent. The skin on her heels cracked and bled, ulcers on her thighs oozed yellow-green pus, and boils formed under her armpits. Doctors cauterized them with red-hot iron, leaving round burns, then applied compresses of wormwood and vinegar for an hour, changing them every half hour. She screamed in pain and then lost consciousness. One of the doctors wrote in his diary, "The smell has become so strong that we cannot stay in her presence for more than 15 minutes. We have to hang rags soaked in vinegar on the doors." The religious side of her life became torture for her. Her confessor came every day, sometimes twice a day. She confessed to her husband, the king, about her infidelities, her secret affairs with knights and even monks. But each time she demanded confirmation from the priest that her sins would be forgiven. Then she would start screaming that she did not believe in forgiveness. In the testimony of Jean's servant, it is said, she tore at her hands, broke her nails, scratched her face, and said that the souls of those she had destroyed were moaning under the bed. Meanwhile, Strange scenes were taking place in the chambers. At night, she would get up, staggering, and demand to be taken to a mirror. There, seeing her face covered with spots, her lips swollen and her eyes red, she would start laughing, then crying. Once she ordered that she be tied to the bed with straps so that she would not follow the demons who were calling her. The servants tied her to a wooden frame and placed felt under her head so that she would not hit it against the boards. Traces of urine and pus remained on the bed, and the sheets had to be changed twice a day. Her heirs argued outside the walls of her chambers. Her older sons, from her first marriage, demanded that she be immediately declared incapable of ruling and that her will be rewritten. Her new favorites stalled for time, hoping that she would name her own heirs. Reports said that one night she was forced to dictate her will, but her words were confused, and the scribes could not make out half of it. The next morning, she no longer remembered what she had said. So passed the first weeks. Her body decayed slowly, step by step. She could still give orders, still call the knights by name, still throw bowls at the doctors' heads, accusing them of witchcraft. But there was already a sense of impending doom in the air. The people in the streets whispered, "The queen is rotting alive. God is punishing her for her sins." The guards were reinforced in the palace. Now, there were 2 guards at the doors of the chambers, one from the old nobility and one from the new entourage. The keys were divided between 3 officials: the chamberlain, the treasurer, and the captain of the guard. Each shift was recorded in a log, but the entries were increasingly falsified. Reports stated, "At night, people who are not on the lists enter the chambers. The doors are opened with keys that should not be there." This became a symbol that the dying queen's power was slipping away, and others were taking control. Her condition worsened with each passing day. The sores on her legs burst and began to ooze pus, which left stains on the felt pads. Dark, foul-smelling bed sores appeared on her back, which the doctors sprinkled with crushed moss and a mixture of resin and vinegar. 3 times a week, they performed bloodletting in small portions, but the blood became thick, almost black. Leeches were now placed on her stomach and behind her ears, where they were left for a quarter of an hour. The doctor's notes indicate the pulse is weak and trembling, the tongue is dry, with cracks, there is little urine, and it has a sharp, putrid odor. Barrels of water infused with herbs were kept in the chambers to mask the stench. But the smell penetrated the walls. The servants complained that the stench made their eyes water. One of the young pages fainted while helping to change the bedding. The queen still tried to maintain the appearance of authority. She demanded that her advisors gather before her bed and listen to their reports. She spoke quietly, in a hoarse voice, often stumbling over her words. Sometimes, in the middle of a speech, she would be seized by a coughing fit, and the smell of rot would come from her mouth. The diaries contain the following lines. She is losing her mind, but clinging to power. She wants to sign decrees, even though her hand is shaking and the ink is smearing on the parchment. The political struggle intensified. The senior branch of the nobility demanded that she be declared incompetent and that power be transferred to her son. New favorites insisted that she was of sound mind and should determine her own heir. The ambassadors of England and Burgundy increased the pressure. The English promised support for the senior line, the Burgundians for the new one. Behind the walls of the chambers, nightly meetings were held to debate the course of foreign policy. Rumors spread among the people about God's punishment. Priests in the streets said that her body was rotting alive as punishment for adultery. People came to the palace and prayed for her death, hoping for a change in power. A report by secret scribes contains the following entry. The crowd whispers, "Better let the house fall than her reign continue." The doctors were helpless. They gave her a pinch of opium in the morning and 2 spoonfuls of poppy syrup in the evening, but this only put her to sleep for a short time. Doctors changed the herbal compresses every half hour. They cauterized the abscesses, but they soon spread again. Her screams echoed through the corridors, and the guards were changed more often so that people would not go mad from the sounds. Confession became a painful ritual. She confessed her betrayals, then recanted, confessed again, and demanded that the priest give her written confirmation of absolution. Once she struck the confessor with a chalice, screaming that he was an agent of her enemies. After that, access to her was restricted, and only priests who had been personally vetted by the favorites were allowed in. Her mind became increasingly clouded. She heard voices, accused her servants of conspiracy, and demanded that their tongues be cut out. Pierre's servant reported, "She ordered me to be tied to a chair and held me there for 2 hours, asking who was whispering at her bedside at night. But there was no one in the room." Paranoia and physical decay went hand in hand. Her hands swelled, her nails turned black and began to fall off. Spots appeared on her face, her eyes watered, and her vision weakened. She asked for a mirror, but when she saw herself, she closed her eyes and screamed. After that, the mirror was removed so as not to drive her mad. Meanwhile, the intrigues intensified. The palace was effectively divided into 2 camps. The old families, with the guard at one door, and the young courtiers at the other. Every evening, skirmishes broke out between their people. One of the knights was found with his throat cut in the corridor, and no one dared to investigate. Weeks passed. Her body rotted. The smell permeated the walls, but she was still alive, still calling out the names of her enemies, still able to sign decrees, and the fear of her remained. The ambassador's records say she lies in stench and sores, but when her voice sounds, everyone bows and listens. Her power is based on fear, even when her body is already decaying. In the first days of winter, her eyes began to cloud over. Her pupils lost their shine, her eyelids swelled, and mucus flowed from the corners of her eyes. The doctors wrote, "Her vision is failing, her face is covered with brown spots, her pulse is slow and weak." She could hardly distinguish people, and therefore suspected everyone. Everyone who entered her room had to say their name loudly and stand by candlelight. But even then, she did not believe them. She screamed that they were murderers in disguise. Her physical suffering intensified. Ulcers spread across her thighs and oozed pus and blood. Doctors tried to wash them with wormwood decoction, vinegar, and honey water, applying compresses of crushed garlic and lard every half hour. They cauterized the edges of the wounds with iron, but the skin spread. She developed a high fever. She sweated profusely, soaking the sheets. Servants changed them 3 times a night. Her sweat smelled sour and cadaverous. The doctor's journal reads, tongue black and dry, urination almost absent, convulsions and moans at night. She was held down with straps. Without them, she would break free and scratch her face and hands. Blood and pieces of her own skin were found under her fingernails. The felt under her body was constantly wet with urine. The bed sores on her back were the size of a palm, and the skin there had turned black and loose. Despite this, she continued to give orders, sometimes delirious, but they were obeyed. She demanded that servants be punished, accused knights of treason, and ordered the expulsion of the old nobility. The fear of her name was such that the guards obeyed even when her orders were incoherent. Reports noted, "Her voice is hoarse, her words confused, but her power is still alive. No one dares to disobey her." Religious fear became torture for her. Her confessor read prayers every day, sometimes up to 4 times. She swore that she saw the shadows of the dead. She screamed that her husband, the king, was standing at her bedside and demanding blood. The priests argued. Some saw it as possession, others as punishment for sins. People in the streets said that the devil had taken up residence in her chambers. The intrigue reached its peak. Old families gathered troops at the palace walls. The new entourage hid the dying queen from prying eyes, fearing that she would be declared insane. Envoys wrote, "The palace is divided. Every corridor is a battlefield. Guards are fighting with their brothers. Soldiers are killing each other for access to a woman who no longer recognizes their faces." Inside the chambers, chaos reigned. At night, her convulsions woke the entire floor. Servants held her by her arms and legs to keep her from falling out of bed. Sometimes she demanded a mirror and said, "Show me what I have become." But the mirror was hidden. She had gone so blind that she could see only the glimmer of the candles. The doctors recorded every procedure. They continued to bleed her in small amounts twice a week, even though she had almost no strength left. They placed leeches on her temples and left them there for a quarter of an hour. They gave her a pinch of opium in the morning and 2 spoonfuls of poppy syrup at night, but the pain did not go away. She screamed even in her sleep. Paranoia became constant. She insisted that the servants were replacing her water and ointments and demanded that the chamberlain taste everything. He fell ill and died 2 weeks later. His death reinforced her suspicions. Now she was certain that there was poison in the walls. Rumors spread throughout the city. People said that the queen would rot alive and the entire house would fall with her. Priests warned their flock that her death would be a sign of change. Crowds gathered at the palace and prayed for her demise. Inside, amid the stench and cries, she was still breathing. Reports said, "Her body is dead, but her voice is alive. She is blind and delirious, but her name still holds the country together." In winter, the smell from her chambers became so strong that the guards demanded to be relieved every 2 hours. Candles smoked and went out, and the walls were saturated with the stench of decay. A chronicler wrote, "It is impossible to breathe near her bed, and the fabric of her clothes darkens from the stench." Her body was almost immobile. Her hands were swollen, her fingers blackened, and her nails fell off. Her legs had turned into heavy, swollen masses with cracks from which fluid oozed. The bed sores on her back were the size of dinner plates. Doctors sprinkled them with ash and applied vinegar-soaked rags, but the skin continued to spread. She lay there without strength, barely moving her lips. She was almost completely blind. She could see only blurred shadows. Sometimes she whispered that she saw figures in the corner, the voices of the dead. Her confessor noted, "Every day she asks for forgiveness, but an hour later she cries out again that her sins have not been forgiven." Medical procedures continued out of habit. Bloodletting, in small portions, was performed once a week, although the doctors admitted that it was killing her. Leeches were applied less and less frequently. Her skin would not hold them, and they would slide off. At night, she was given 2 spoonfuls of poppy syrup, but the screams did not stop. Compressors of garlic and lard were changed every half hour, but the smell only grew stronger. Those around her began to act on her behalf. She was no longer able to sign decrees. Scribes held her hand and guided the pen. Sometimes they simply drew a crooked line and claimed it was her signature. This is how decisions on executions and pardons were made. The old nobility claimed that the documents were forged, but they were afraid to accuse anyone directly. Open warfare broke out in the corridors of the palace. Guards of the old nobility and the new favorites clashed in skirmishes. 2 were killed on the stairs, another was found strangled at the gate. Reports said, "Every hour there is blood on the stones, every day there is a new corpse." The ambassadors noted that power had passed to a council of favorites. They decided fates, even though the queen was still breathing in her chambers, but her name was kept as a cover. In the report of the Burgundian ambassador, "She lies in stench, but her seal still rules the country." The servants fled. Only those who were held by force or fear remained. One of the cooks was caught trying to escape and hanged on the orders of the favorites to deter others. Rumors in the city grew even darker. People said that power had long been in the hands of the devil, and the queen was just a rotting vessel. A crowd gathered at the palace and whispered prayers, demanding an end. Inside her chambers, she was still trying to give orders. Her voice was quiet and hoarse, her words confused. Sometimes she called for long dead nights. Sometimes she demanded whips for the nuns. Sometimes she asked for wine. But they did not give it to her. Her orders were recorded and interpreted in a way that suited the council. The doctor's report said, "She has a constant fever. Her skin is decaying, her tongue is black, and her teeth are loose. Her breath is foul, smelling of dead meat." She became a shadow to those around her. People were afraid to come near her, afraid to touch her. But her name still appeared in documents, and her corpse's breath still held power. Weeks passed. She was almost dead, but still alive. And around her, they were already dividing her throne. In winter, her breathing became irregular, and the doctors wrote, "Pulse barely discernible, constant fever, no urine." She hardly opened her eyes. Her lips were cracked. Her teeth were loose and falling out. Her voice was barely audible, hoarse. Sometimes only her lips moved. She spent her last days tied down with straps to prevent her from falling out of bed in convulsions. The felt under her body was soaked with pus and urine and was changed every half day. But the stench was so bad that the priest confessed her through a cloth soaked in vinegar. The records say she was barely breathing, but demanded that her sins of adultery be forgiven. Again and again she asked, "Tell me that God has forgiven me." At night, when the guards at the door were relieved, she took her last breath. Jean's servant said. She raised her hand as if to say something, but her fingers immediately fell limp. Her body remained motionless. Thus ended the life of the queen, known as the She-Wolf. After her death, her body was carried out secretly. The servants complained that it was impossible to touch her without vomiting. Her skin was peeling off her bones, and she smelled like carrion. Doctors tried to embalm her. They opened her abdomen, but her insides were already black and decomposed. They covered them with salt, resin, and crushed charcoal, but the smell did not go away. The flesh on her face was cracking, so they covered her face with a heavy veil. When she was carried into the cathedral, the guards held torches, but the crowd recoiled. People covered their faces with cloth. Rumors spread. Even dead, she stinks worse than the living. The political consequences were immediate. The old families declared that all the decrees of the last few weeks were fake and demanded a review. The favorites insisted that the will was valid and tried to hold on to power. Open clashes began. In a report by the English ambassador, on the day of her death, blood was shed in 3 halls of the palace. Old and new enemies hacked each other with swords at the very coffin. The people saw her death as a sign. Prayers were held in churches where it was said, "God has punished debauchery and pride." Crowds marched to the palace, demanding the execution of her associates. Several favorites were captured and hanged right at the gates. Ambassadors from neighboring powers saw this as an opportune moment. England and Burgundy immediately began negotiations with the heirs, promising support to those who accepted their terms. France was thrown into chaos. The council was divided, the army split, and riots broke out in the provinces. Later, chronicles wrote, "She lived when she was already rotting. Her breath kept the country in fear, and her death brought turmoil. The people hated her, the nobility feared her name, and the church declared her an example of God's punishment." Thus ended the story of the Queen, known as the French Wolf. Her death was not the end, but the beginning of the collapse of power, a new chapter in the history of the country. All that remained of her greatness was the stench and blood in the corridors of the palace.